The night smelled of rain and regret. Noah Carter gripped the steering wheel of his black SUV, staring at the dimly lit house in front of him. It was past midnight, yet every light inside was burning like a silent alarm. His hands tightened until his knuckles turned white. Tonight was the night he learned the truth. His fingers hovered over his phone, debating whether to call Lena. But what would he even say? "Hey, honey, I found your little black notebook, the one where you pour your soul out to another man." Instead, he just watched. Minutes stretched into eternity before the sound of tires crunching against the wet pavement shattered the silence. A sleek silver sedan pulled into the driveway. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Lena Sullivan, his wife of 15 years, the woman he had built a life with. She was beautiful as ever, but there was something different about her. Something foreign. Her usually composed expression was replaced by a soft, distracted smile. Her fingers brushed against her lips as if reliving a memory. Noah's stomach churned. He already knew. He had known for weeks. Still, seeing it was something else entirely. Lena hesitated before stepping onto the porch. Then, as if sensing something, she turned toward the street. Her gaze skimmed the parked cars, but she never noticed him sitting in the shadows. Noah held his breath as she fished out her keys and disappeared inside. This was it. He exhaled sharply, forcing himself to move. His body felt heavy, like it was filled with wet cement, but he pushed forward. He stepped out of his car, the rain kissing his skin as he crossed the street. By the time he reached the front door, the tension in his chest had become unbearable. Inside, he heard the clatter of heels against the hardwood floor, a muffled sigh, the sound of a zipper being pulled. He had spent years memorizing every sound in this house. But tonight, they felt foreign. He pushed open the door. Lena froze. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She stood in the entryway, her coat draped over her arm, her hair tousled in a way that wasn't natural for someone just coming home from work. Her lips slightly smudged. Noah swallowed the bile rising in his throat. "You're home late," he said finally. Lena's grip on her coat tightened. Yeah. There was a late-night segment at the station. Victoria needed me to." "No," his voice came out sharper than he intended. Lena's eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly. "No. No more lies, Lena." The air between them thickened. She glanced past him, toward the hallway that led to their bedroom. He followed her gaze, then turned back to her. "Don't look for a way out of this," he said. She licked her lips. "I don't know what you're talking about." Noah reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the small black notebook. Lena's breath hitched. For the first time that night, fear crept into her expression. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. Noah didn't answer. He flipped through the pages, the words burned into his mind like a scar that would never fade. Every entry was a knife to the gut, each word a betrayal. "Ryan held my hand today. I didn't pull away. He told me he thinks about me all the time. I told him I think about him too. I'm scared of what this means, but I don't want to stop." Noah clenched his jaw. He had wanted to believe it was innocent, that it was nothing more than a stupid crush, a passing moment of weakness. But the last entry shattered any hope of that. "We booked the hotel for next Thursday. I can't believe I'm actually doing this." His throat tightened. "I read it all," he said, his voice low. "Every word." Lena's face paled. "Noah. Don't." He took a step forward, and she instinctively stepped back. The distance between them had never felt so vast. "I want to hear you say it." Lena swallowed hard. "It's not what you think." "Not what I think?" A bitter chuckle escaped his lips. "So you weren't planning to meet Ryan at a hotel?" Her silence was deafening. Noah felt something inside him break. He had imagined this confrontation 100 times, convinced himself he would be calm, composed. But now, standing here, staring at the woman who had lied to him for God knows how long, all he felt was exhaustion. "I need the truth," he said finally. Lena hesitated. And then as slowly she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. The words sucked the air from the room. For a moment, Noah didn't move. He just stood there, staring at her, waiting for the moment the ground would stop crumbling beneath him. It never did. Without a word, he turned and walked down the hallway. "Noah, wait," Lena called after him, panic creeping into her voice. She followed him into the bedroom, but he was already opening the closet, pulling out a suitcase. "What are you doing?" Noah didn't answer. His hands worked mechanically, throwing clothes into the bag, his mind detached from his body. He felt her watching him, felt the weight of her guilt pressing down on him, but he didn't stop. "Noah, please," she begged. It was a mistake. He finally turned to face her, his eyes colder than she had ever seen them. "A mistake?" he repeated, his voice eerily calm. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is saying something you don't mean in the heat of an argument. He took a step closer. You didn't make a mistake, Lena. His voice dropped to a whisper. You made a choice. Tears welled in her eyes, but Noah had no sympathy left to give. I can fix this, she pleaded. No, he said simply. You can't. A sound from the doorway made them both turn. Olivia stood there, her 17-year-old frame looking small, fragile. Her face was pale, her eyes glistening. She had heard everything. For the first time, Lena looked truly broken. Sweetheart. But Olivia's gaze didn't soften. Instead, she took a step back, and then another, until she turned and walked away. Lena let out a small, broken sob, but Noah didn't comfort her. There was nothing left to say. With one final glance at the woman he once loved, Noah zipped up his suitcase, walked past her, and out the door. The night swallowed him whole. Noah Carter sat on the edge of Marcus's couch, staring at the floor. The beer in his hand had gone warm, untouched, his fingers gripping the bottle just to have something to hold on to. The weight of the past few hours pressed down on him like a collapsing building. Marcus had been quiet for a long time, letting the silence settle between them. It wasn't the awkward kind, though. It was the kind that said, I'm here. Take your time. Finally, Marcus sighed and leaned back in his chair. Man, I don't even know what to say, he admitted. You want me to tell you she's a piece of shit? That you're better off without her? 'Cause I will. Hell, I'll say it all night if it helps. Noah let out a weak chuckle. It wasn't much, but it was something. I don't know what helps right now, he muttered. It still doesn't feel real. Marcus nodded. Yeah, I get that. When my brother died, I kept waking up expecting him to call me. Like the world just forgot to tell me it was real. Noah glanced up. This isn't the same. No, it's not, Marcus admitted. But losing someone you thought would always be there feels pretty damn close. That hit deeper than Noah expected. He looked away, his jaw tightening. She looked me in the eye and tried to lie, he said finally. Even after I showed her the notebook. She still. His voice cracked slightly. She still tried to weasel her way out. Marcus shook his head. People like that, they can't handle consequences. They spend their whole lives thinking they can get away with shit because they're good at talking their way out of it. Noah exhaled slowly. I keep thinking about Olivia. Marcus leaned forward. How's she handling it? Noah's throat tightened. She looked at me like I was supposed to fix it. Like she was waiting for me to say something that would make it all okay. He let out a hollow laugh. And I had nothing. Marcus was quiet for a moment. You don't have to fix everything, man. You just have to be there for her. Noah nodded, but said nothing. He wasn't sure if he even knew how to do that anymore. Lena Sullivan was unraveling. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Olivia's face. That look of betrayal. That sharp edge in her voice that had never been there before. It was worse than Noah leaving. Because Noah? He was angry. He had every right to be. But Olivia? Olivia was shattered. Lena sat on the edge of the bed, gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had called Ryan 4 times. Nothing. She typed out a text. Please call me. I need to talk. She hesitated, then deleted it. Pathetic. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. What did you think would happen, Lena? That you'd destroy your family and run off into the sunset? Her reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger. Her perfect makeup was gone, replaced by smudged mascara and dark circles. Her lips, once painted with careful precision, were now bare and cracked. She looked like exactly what she was. A woman who had lost everything. The house was too quiet. The absence of Noah's steady presence was suffocating. The space beside her in bed felt too empty, too cold. She needed to see Olivia. Maybe I can fix this. Lena grabbed her car keys and walked out the door. Olivia Carter sat alone in the school library, staring at her phone. Her dad hadn't texted yet. She told herself she didn't care. That was a lie. Her fingers hovered over his contact before she locked the screen and shoved her phone into her hoodie pocket. She didn't know how to feel. Angry, sad, confused. All of it blurred together into something too big to handle. So she just sat there. Liv. A voice broke through her thoughts. She glanced up to see Jessica Harper standing there, shifting awkwardly. Jessica. Her best friend since they were kids. Or at least, she used to be. Not anymore. Not after last year, when Jessica had started dating Olivia's ex 2 weeks after their breakup. What do you want? Olivia asked flatly. Jessica hesitated. I heard about your mom, she said. I just wanted to see if you were okay. Olivia let out a sharp, Bitter laugh. You mean you wanted to be the first to hear the gossip so you could spread it around like last time? Jessica flinched. That's not fair, she said quietly. I messed up before. I know that. But this isn't about that. This is about you. Olivia crossed her arms, trying to keep the wall up. You don't have to do this, Jessica added. You don't have to go through this alone. Olivia swallowed hard. For a moment, she considered pushing her away again. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't want to be alone. She sighed. I don't even know where to start. Jessica sat down across from her. Then just start with whatever hurts the most. Noah stood outside Ryan Coleman's office, waiting. His fists clenched and unclenched at his sides, his mind racing. He wasn't sure what he was going to say, only that he needed to say something. When the door finally opened, Ryan stepped out, his expression shifting from surprise to discomfort in an instant. Noah's jaw tightened. Ryan. An awkward pause stretched between them. Look, I know what this is about, Ryan started. And I just want to say. Noah cut him off. I don't want your apology. Ryan swallowed. Then what do you want? Noah stepped closer, his voice low and even. I want you to know that I see you. For what you are. For what you've always been. Ryan exhaled sharply. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Noah let out a humorless laugh. That's what cheaters always say, isn't it? Ryan hesitated. I didn't mean to hurt you. Noah tilted his head. You didn't think you would get caught. Ryan looked away. Noah let the silence stretch. Then, finally, he shook his head. I'm not going to hit you, Ryan. Ryan let out a breath of relief. But I am going to make sure you feel what I felt. Before Ryan could respond, Noah turned and walked away. And for the first time in days, he felt like he was finally in control. Noah parked outside the diner and let the engine idle. The neon sign buzzed above the entrance, casting its dull glow across the rain-speckled pavement. He had been sitting there for nearly 10 minutes, watching people come and go, delaying the moment he had to step inside. He ran a hand down his face, exhaustion settling into his bones. His wedding ring was still on his finger. He hadn't taken it off yet, not because he still believed in it, but because removing it felt like admitting that it was really over. Lena was waiting. He inhaled deeply, then pushed the door open. The small bell jingled overhead, and the warmth of coffee and syrup met him, bringing back memories that had nothing to do with this version of his life. She was at a booth near the window. Her hands were wrapped around a cup of coffee, fingers lightly tapping against the ceramic. When she saw him, she straightened, her lips parting slightly, as if she had something rehearsed. Noah slid into the seat across from her, keeping the table between them. You wanted to talk, he said. His voice was quiet but firm. She hesitated, her hands tightening around the cup. I wasn't sure you'd come. Neither was I. A small, humorless smile tugged at her lips. Silence stretched between them. The sounds of clinking silverware and quiet conversation filled the space around them, but it might as well have been another world. I don't even know where to start, she admitted. Noah exhaled through his nose, staring at her like she was a stranger. Try the truth. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. I messed up. His jaw tightened. You did more than mess up, Lena. You chose this. She flinched, blinking quickly. I know, she whispered. And I know saying sorry isn't enough, but I need you to hear me. Noah leaned back against the seat, his fingers tracing patterns on the worn tabletop. He wasn't sure he had it in him to listen, but he owed himself the closure. She licked her lips, looking down at her hands. I was lonely, she started, voice barely above a whisper. You were always working, always busy with Olivia, with your sculptures. And I. She stopped herself, shaking her head. I'm not making excuses. I don't know when I stopped feeling like I mattered. A bitter chuckle escaped Noah. So you decided to sleep with my business partner? That made you feel important? Tears welled in her eyes. It wasn't about him. Then what was it about, Lena? His voice was sharp, cutting through the pretense. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you burned our family to the ground for something that didn't even last. She sucked in a shaky breath. I never stopped loving you. Noah went still. His fingers curled into his palms, his nails biting into his skin. You don't get to say that, he said, his voice rough. Lena's expression crumbled. You don't get to sit here and act like love had anything to do with this. Her shoulders shook, and she looked away. He should have felt satisfied. He should have wanted this, should have wanted to see her understand, finally, what she had done. But it didn't feel good. It didn't feel like anything. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled off his wedding ring. He set it on the table between them. Lena stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. I came here because you asked me to, he said, voice calm now. But I don't have anything else to give you. She looked up at him, desperation flickering in her eyes. Noah. He stood up. It's over. For the first time, she didn't try to stop him. She just sat there, watching as he walked out of the diner and into the night. Olivia sat on the floor of her bedroom, her back against the bed frame, phone resting in her lap. She had read her dad's message an hour ago. I'm home. She had wanted to respond, but she didn't know what to say. Instead, she had just been staring at it, as if looking long enough would give her the right words. A knock at the door made her stiffen. Her mother's voice came through, soft and hesitant. Olivia. She clenched her jaw. Another pause. I just want to talk. Olivia closed her eyes, gripping her phone tighter. She didn't answer. She couldn't. After a few seconds, footsteps retreated, and her mother's door closed down the hall. She let out a slow, shaky breath, her chest tight. Her phone buzzed. Jessica. Hey. You don't have to talk, but I'm here. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She could ignore it. She could let it sit there, unread, like everything else. Instead, she typed 2 words. Not okay. A moment passed. Then Jessica replied. Want me to come over? Olivia hesitated. Then, finally, she typed, yeah. She put her phone down and exhaled, staring at the ceiling. She wasn't sure if anything would ever feel normal again. But for now, at least, she wasn't alone. Noah sat on the edge of his bed, rubbing his hands together. His phone sat on the nightstand, screen dark. He had expected to feel something. Relief. Anger. Closure. Instead, he just felt tired. He reached for his phone, thumb hovering over Olivia's name. Then, finally, he sent a message. Are you okay? A minute passed. Then another. The screen lit up. No. But I will be. Noah exhaled, some of the weight in his chest loosening just a little. It wasn't much. But it was enough. Noah sat at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had long gone cold. The house was quiet, unnervingly so. It wasn't just the absence of Lena. It was something deeper. Something that made the air feel heavier, like every room carried the weight of the past few weeks. He had told himself he needed the silence, that it would help him think. But now, sitting here, he wasn't so sure. A quiet shuffle from the hallway made him look up. Olivia stood there, arms wrapped tightly around herself, hesitation in her eyes. Hey, he said softly. Hey. She hovered for a moment before finally stepping into the kitchen. You hungry? He asked, gesturing toward the fridge. She shook her head. No. A pause. Can we talk? Noah straightened. Of course. She pulled out a chair and sat across from him, her fingers fidgeting with the sleeve of her hoodie. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. She just stared at the table, lost in thought. Noah waited. She had always been like this, careful with her words, only speaking when she had figured out exactly what she wanted to say. Finally, she took a breath. I don't know what to do with all of this. He frowned slightly. With what? She shrugged, still looking down. Everything. The way people look at me at school. The way I feel when I see her name pop up on my phone. The way I keep trying to act normal, but nothing feels normal anymore. Noah's chest ached. I know, he said gently. And I wish I had an easy answer for you. But the truth is, I don't know what to do either. She finally looked up at him. Then what do we do? Noah exhaled. We take it one day at a time. She swallowed, her eyes shining with emotions she was trying so hard to keep in. And if it never stops hurting? His throat tightened. It will, he promised. Maybe not today, maybe not next week. But it will. Olivia studied him for a long moment before nodding, just once. Then, hesitantly, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. He squeezed it gently. For the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel so empty. The studio was colder than he remembered. Dust coated the workbench, the air thick with the scent of forgotten projects. Noah stood in front of the covered sculpture, fingers twitching at his sides. He had spent so long avoiding this place, avoiding the work that had once been his sanctuary. Now, there was nothing left to hide behind. He took a breath and pulled the sheet away. The sculpture stood in front of him, unfinished yet somehow still alive. The fractured glass caught the morning light, throwing shards of color across the floor. It was beautiful. It was broken. Noah clenched his jaw, his hands curling into fists. And then, before he could stop himself, he grabbed the hammer from the workbench. The first strike sent a crack running through the glass. The second sent shards flying to the ground. The third left it in ruins. His breathing was heavy, his chest tight. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring at the wreckage. Then, slowly, he reached for a fresh piece of glass. Not to fix what was broken, but to build something new. Lena sat in her car outside the house, her fingers gripping the steering wheel. She had told herself she wouldn't come here. But she hadn't been able to stop herself. She had called Olivia twice. No answer. She had called Noah once. Straight to voicemail. Now, she was just sitting here, staring at the front door of a house she no longer belonged to. Her hands trembled as she picked up her phone again. She hesitated. Then she dialed. It rang. Once. Twice. Then. Voicemail. She swallowed hard. Noah, she whispered. I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything. And I know I can't undo what I've done. But I needed to say I'm sorry. Her voice cracked. I lost you. I lost her. And I know I did this to myself. But God, I miss you both. Silence. She let out a slow, shaky breath. Goodbye, Noah. She ended the call and set the phone down. Then, without looking back, she put the car in drive and left. Noah stood at the sink, rinsing out his coffee mug, watching the slow swirl of water disappear down the drain. He hadn't realized how many mornings had started the same way, absently staring at something, lost in thought, waiting for the day to feel normal again. It never did. Footsteps creaked behind him. Olivia was awake. He turned just as she walked into the kitchen, her hoodie pulled over her head, her bare feet quiet against the floor. She looked at him, then at the coffee pot, then back at him. I don't suppose you made enough for two? She asked, voice rough from sleep. Noah gave her a small smirk and poured another cup. She took it without a word, curling her hands around the warmth of the mug, blowing on the surface like it might erase everything else she didn't want to feel. They stood there for a moment, neither speaking. There was no need to fill the silence. Did she call you? Olivia finally asked, her voice quieter now. No. Olivia nodded, staring down at her coffee like she was trying to read something in it. She left me a voicemail. Noah's fingers tightened around his cup. He hadn't expected that. Did you listen to it? She hesitated. Not yet. He let out a slow breath. You don't have to. I know, she said, shifting her weight. But I think I will. Just not today. Noah nodded. That was enough. In his studio, Noah ran his fingers along the edges of a piece of glass, feeling the smooth surface meet sharp fractures. He had been staring at it for nearly an hour, trying to decide what to do with it. It was beautiful in its own way, even broken. He thought about destroying it, starting over completely. But something stopped him. Instead, he picked up his tools and got to work. Lena sat on the edge of the hotel bed, her fingers scrolling through old photos on her phone. Images of Olivia as a toddler, sitting on Noah's shoulders, her tiny hands tangled in his hair. A picture of their last Christmas together, everyone smiling, unaware that it would be the last one before everything shattered. She should stop looking, but she couldn't. She kept searching for a moment where she could pinpoint the shift, where everything had started slipping away. But there was no single moment, just a series of choices, each one tilting the balance a little more. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back to reality. Her heart jumped for a second, but when she looked, it was only a reminder of a missed work email. She set the phone down on the nightstand, pressing her hands over her face. She had lost them, and maybe she was only just beginning to understand what that really meant. That evening, Noah sat on the couch, flipping through an old sketchbook. Most of the pages were filled with ideas he had never finished, things that had once mattered before life had gotten in the way. He hadn't realized how much he had put off, how many things had been waiting for later. Olivia walked into the room, sitting down at the other end of the couch, pulling her knees to her chest. You going to Marcus's later? She asked. Thinking about it, Noah said, shutting the sketchbook. You okay if I go for a bit? She shrugged. Yeah, I think I might go to Jessica's. That surprised him. You sure? She hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, I think I need to be around someone who isn't this. She gestured vaguely between them, not unkindly, just honest. Noah smiled, small but genuine. That sounds like a good idea. She let out a breath. Yeah, maybe. For the first time in a long time, it felt like something was shifting. Not back to what it was, but towards something else. And for now, that was enough. Noah let the truck idle for a moment, staring at the bar's neon sign flickering against the night. The hum of the engine was steady, almost comforting, but it couldn't drown out the weight pressing against his ribs. He hadn't been here in years, hadn't needed to. Now, he wasn't sure if coming was a sign of progress or just another way to keep himself from sitting alone in that quiet house. Finally, he killed the engine and stepped out. The familiar scent of old wood and whiskey greeted him as he pushed through the door. It was busy, the kind of crowd that made the air thick with conversation and laughter. Marcus was easy to spot, leaning back in his chair at their usual table, already watching him. "Look at this," he said, shaking his head as Noah slid into the seat across from him. "Didn't think you had it in you." Noah smirked. "Almost didn't." Marcus pushed a beer across the table. "Drink. You look like you could use it." Noah picked it up, rolling the condensation between his fingers before taking a sip. The bitterness settled on his tongue, familiar in a way that reminded him of another lifetime, before everything fell apart, before he had to relearn who he was without Lena. "So," Marcus said, tapping his fingers against the table. "How's Olivia?" Noah sighed, setting his glass down. "She's figuring it out. Some days are better than others." "And you?" Noah huffed a small laugh. "Still a work in progress." Marcus nodded, taking a sip of his own drink. "Well, I hate to break it to you, but that's pretty much the whole deal. You don't wake up one day and suddenly have it all figured out." Noah exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, I'm starting to get that." They sat in silence for a moment before Marcus leaned in, his voice quieter now. "Listen, man. I know you. You're carrying all this weight, like you have to hold everything together for her. But live strong. And so are you. You just gotta let yourself breathe, too." Noah swallowed, staring at the beer in front of him. He had spent so much time trying to keep Olivia steady that he hadn't thought about what it meant to let go of the wreckage himself. Maybe he wasn't stuck. Maybe he was just afraid of what came next. Olivia sat on Jessica's bed, hugging a pillow to her chest. The air smelled like vanilla and something warm, clean laundry. Maybe. It was comforting, even if she felt anything but. Jessica was sitting cross-legged on the floor, flipping through a magazine, pretending like Olivia wasn't falling apart in real time. Olivia took a slow breath. "She left me a voicemail." Jessica didn't look up. "Your mom?" "Yeah." A beat of silence. Then, softly, Jessica asked, "Did you listen to it?" Olivia shook her head. "I don't know if I want to." Jessica finally looked up, studying her carefully. "Then don't." Olivia bit her lip. "But what if?" "What if what?" "What if she says something that makes me want to forgive her?" Jessica tilted her head. "And would that be the worst thing?" Olivia exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. "I don't know. I just don't want her words to make me doubt what I already know." "And what do you know?" "That she broke everything. That she chose him over us. That she lied and kept lying and now." Olivia's voice cracked, and she forced herself to swallow down the lump in her throat. "I just don't want to open the door again. I don't want to let her back in, even in my head." Jessica set the magazine aside and leaned forward. "Then don't listen to it. It's not an obligation. It's not some test you have to pass. If you don't want to hear what she has to say, then that's your answer." Olivia closed her eyes, exhaling through her nose. "Could it really be that simple?" "I guess I'll just leave it there, then," she murmured. Jessica nudged her foot. "Or delete it. Maybe that's your answer, too." Olivia didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached for her phone, staring at the screen where the voicemail still sat, waiting. Maybe one day she'd press play. But not today. She locked the screen and set the phone aside. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's talk about anything else." Jessica grinned. "I thought you'd never ask." Noah stepped into his studio, inhaling deeply. The scent of varnish and metal filled the air, grounding him. It had been weeks since he had let himself really be here, really exist in this space without feeling like it was mocking him. The half-finished sculpture stood in the center of the room, waiting. For weeks, he had looked at it and seen nothing but failure, something that had started out beautiful and ended up shattered. But now, as he stepped closer, he saw something else. It wasn't perfect, but maybe it didn't have to be. He reached for his tools, running his fingers over the worn wooden handles. Then, without hesitation, he got to work. Lena sat in her car outside the hotel, the city lights stretching long shadows across the windshield. She had checked her phone at least 10 times in the last hour. No messages. No missed calls. Olivia hadn't responded. Noah hadn't either. She had spent the last few weeks telling herself that if she just apologized enough, if she found the right words, she could fix this. That there was a way back. But tonight, for the first time, she wondered if she was lying to herself. Maybe some things weren't meant to be repaired. Her fingers hovered over Olivia's contact, but she didn't call. Instead, she set the phone down, staring at the city beyond the glass. She had lost them, and she was finally beginning to understand that no words would bring them back. For the first time, she let that truth settle in, and then she drove away.